So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Kath Murphy, the Sales Manager for Enghouse Interactive across Australia and New Zealand, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today to hear about the pros and cons of moving your contact centre to the cloud. We are hearing many organisations asking this question, so we thought it was a good idea to get a couple of experts in to look at it. We'll go through the fors and against and some of the considerations for both, and then you're in a position where you can decide if you fit the profile of a business with a good case to move or whether you need to think some more. Now I'll introduce our presenters for today. I'm delighted to have two experts of such high calibre to showcase these products to you. Our presenter from Enghouse today is John Cray. He's the VP of Product Management at Enghouse. He's based in Chicago. So thank you, John, for waiting up. John's responsibility at Enghouse is to define the global strategy and vision for Enghouse's portfolio of contact centre products. As his portfolio includes both cloud and on-premise solutions, John is definitely one of the best people to give us both sides of the story here. Also, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest today, Justin Tippett, the founder at CX Group Australia, who will use his local expertise to apply local context to John's presentation and to provide his own insights as we go. Justin says that like most people, he fell into call centres and was immediately attracted to the fast-paced hustle and bustle environment. That initial attraction has turned into a professional career, and he's incredibly passionate about sharing the benefits of not only working in our industry, but teaching businesses how an effective contact centre and customer experience strategy can contribute to a successful business. Of course, along the way, Justin has encountered many organisations researching, discussing, planning and moving to the cloud, which we know is a very hot topic. So we'll be interested to hear what he's got to say as well. But first of all, I'd like to hand you over to John to start us off. Mr. Cray, over to you.
Thank you, Kath. Hi, everybody. As Kath said, I'm in Chicago, and so apologies in advance for subjecting you to an American accent for an hour here. Justin and I are going to trade back and forth a bit. We're going to carry on a conversation about the topic, which we hope kind of from us going back and forth and discussing the ins and outs of cloud and some of the considerations and when you're thinking about a move to cloud. Hopefully we'll be able to convey some insights from both of our perspectives. Before we get started, we did want to ask you a poll question. So we've got a couple of these through the call here, but to start things off, we wanted to find out kind of who's on the phone, what roles do we actually have in the webinar today. We might adjust our approach based on who's actually attending. So if you wouldn't mind, could answer a brief question for us. Just what is your role? Okay, we're in the midst of collecting the responses. We'll give it another few seconds here. It looks like a very interesting split. I love watching the stats refresh in real time here. Okay, so it looks like it's almost an even split between IT and operations folks and contact center management, customer service management folks. And then we've got a smattering of executives and consultants in the mix as well. So thanks for asking the question. So since we've got a pretty even balance between, let's call it the technical and the business side of the equation, we'll try to strike the same balance as we go throughout the conversation. So with that, let's dive in and we'll get started. So the movement to cloud, what's actually going on in the market? So we've got some statistics in here and there. The statistics are global in nature. So what you're seeing here is measurements that come out of customer surveys and various measurements of the market that are conducted globally and not just in one region. So these are not just tied to, say, the Australia, New Zealand region, but rather are focusing on the globe. And what's interesting about the movement of contact center to cloud is that it goes along with the movement of other aspects of the infrastructure to cloud, including a significant connection point with contact center, which is telephony. We all know that telephony and contact center are joined at the hip, just as people used to buy PBXs and buy contact center solutions to go with the PBX. Now, as people buy new telephony solutions, some of which are in the cloud, there are contact center associations that go along with that. And what's interesting about this particular stat is it's showing from Gartner, the poll was actually late last year, that the crossover point for when more cloud-based telephony endpoints will be sold versus premise-based telephony endpoints is happening late this year, early next year. So late 2019, early 2020. At that point, new endpoints sold, whether it's an add-on to an existing telephony infrastructure or a brand new telephony infrastructure, new endpoints sold will cross over and will continue to diverge at that point. Now, that doesn't mean that the actual number of deployed endpoints will be predominantly cloud at that point, because we've still got a lot of legacy PBXs out there. That crossover is expected to be around 2024 or so. But this is an inexorable movement to cloud that's going on the telephony side. And along with that, no big surprise, is we're seeing an incredible growth in the cloud contact center market. According to IDC, over 22% globally, whereas the overall contact center market is only growing at 5.7%. So this implies, as it should, that on-premise is actually in decline right now. There are many more cloud contact centers going in, or many more customers moving from on-premise to cloud contact center solutions. So the growth is pretty held steady over the last few years, but a lot of it is swung to cloud. So another quick poll question as we're getting started here, just so we understand kind of how to put things into perspective. Where are you in your plan for Cloud Contact Center? Again, if you could do us a favor and just answer a very brief poll here, then we'll try to be able to sort of measure our approach here based on where you are currently. Okay, so again, I'm watching the numbers change in real time. Okay, so things appear, okay, the already using cloud number is still relatively small in the poll, about 9 or 10%. About a quarter of you are saying that you plan to implement cloud in the short term. Almost half are saying you're seriously researching cloud for the longer term, and about a fifth are saying you have no immediate strategy to implement cloud. So, okay, so it looks like 75%, close to it, are either at cloud already or implementing it in the near future. So that's a high percentage of the audience, and I'm going to assume that the others that are attending are interested in the topic, want to know the trade-offs, but haven't planned anything yet. So, Justin, is that a surprise to you? Is that kind of level of statistics interesting to you?
Yeah, hi everyone. John, it's pretty much spot on with a survey that was done here in Australia about a month ago. There was 108 centres that were surveyed, and of that, there was 65% said they're currently investigating it. 10% were implementing very soon, and it was about a quarter that was on the long-term sort of radar, or they had no plan. So yeah, pretty consistent numbers with what we've seen here as well. That's spot on.
That's spot on with what we're seeing here. Statistics are amazing. Okay, so why don't we get started? And this is where I think it's interesting that we hear a lot of folks say, well, we have to move to the cloud, and not necessarily then diving any deeper than that. And then, you know, it's kind of incumbent on us to guide and say, what are the trade-offs and what are the options available when you actually want to move to the cloud? So what does in the cloud actually mean? So I've got a little building drawn here that represents the enterprise. And of course, folks that are looking at cloud typically have on-premise equipment, or they have equipment that are currently physically resident in some kind of connected data center or co-located facility, or colo. So it's kind of a mix of those two. And then what happens when a business starts to consider cloud applications is they might quickly discover that many of these applications that they're interested in run in multiple clouds. Some applications might run in Amazon or Google or Microsoft or IBM or assorted other cloud capabilities within a region. And what you end up with is a bit of a hybrid. So what we're seeing is that everybody doesn't just jump onto Amazon all of a sudden, that we're seeing quite a bit of hybrid configurations resident in the market. And in fact, what we're seeing is that folks still retain, to some extent, some on-premise equipment, typically, at least for a while, at least until the applications that are resident there or the data that is resident there can be moved efficiently and effectively. And the colo or data center is also pretty much kept around, at least for a while, until the full move into the cloud. So what we're seeing right now is it's very atypical for someone to just throw all their systems completely into a public cloud infrastructure. It's much more common where it happens over time and happens as a hybrid kind of configuration. So what do we mean by cloud infrastructure? Many of you probably know that the industry has kind of divided cloud into three main categories. What you might call infrastructure as a cloud, where we're really just talking about raw compute power, machines, CPUs, and storage capabilities, and corresponding networking to access those capabilities running in an infrastructure. And you can pay per bandwidth or per minute or per storage gigabyte to use that infrastructure. And then if you go one layer up, then we're talking about putting a construct on top of the infrastructure that allows you to start using it as a platform and taking advantage of the components that eventually will be built together into applications. And at the top level, we're talking about software as a service. And this is, of course, the accelerated trend of applications running in the cloud, like a full-blown contact center application. And that is a SaaS application, typically meaning that you pay by the month or by the year to lease the application, lease the usage of the application in a cloud infrastructure. The SaaS applications, of course, leverage platform as a service and underneath that infrastructure as a service. So this is a layered approach that builds from IaaS up to SaaS. And then all three of those kinds of options can be obtained either via a public cloud network or via a private cloud data center. So you can access these different levels and layers in the way that you choose. And this is where it can get pretty complicated because the cost model can change, the security model can change, the level of access can change, the quality of service can change, the uptime guarantees can change. All of the kinds of things that you consider when you're looking at cloud are different depending on how you slice and dice your options. So those are some of the kinds of things we want to investigate as we walk through these slides from the perspective of contact center. I realize this is a little bit more on the IT side of the equation, but we'll also talk more on the contact center management side of the equation in terms of the benefits for some of these options. Okay, so what about contact center? Okay, well, if we map these kinds of things to the contact center software as a service options, you still can make decisions about whether you want to be fully in the public cloud. Let's say, for example, a contact center application running as a multi-tenanted service running in a public cloud, where all you're worried about is attaching your PCs through a browser to an application in the distant cloud. Or do you want to operate a hybrid where, say, your PCs are connected to that cloud, but are also connected to on-premise equipment, and the on-premise equipment is also connected to the cloud, so that effectively you get the benefit of a hybrid configuration where you're leveraging data and services from both cloud and non-cloud at the same time. And we'll talk about where that's beneficial. Or there's also this option where you can segment a portion of the cloud just for yourself and not be in a multi-tenanted environment, but rather be in your own private instance within a cloud infrastructure. And again, that cloud infrastructure could be public or could be a private facility that you're leasing space from, but you've segmented off your own area and then you connect into that. So you still don't own any equipment on premise, you still don't own the IT management of that infrastructure, but you do have your own isolated instance within that cloud environment. We're going to talk about where the trade-offs are between these different options, but they all are available to you today. So, Justin, anything before we dive into the actual specifics?
No, I think that's a really good overview. And as you said, we're going to cover off a bit later in the presentation about the benefits of each one of those. So, yep, keep on plowing along.
Right. Okay. And we fully recognize that a number of you are going to be on premise today or in a hybrid today, and you're going to be interested in making yourself more cloud enabled and the trade-offs there. And so we are going to be getting into a bit of what does it mean to remain on premise, and would you ever want to do that? And why would you ever want to do that? So we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So we have everything on this slide Enghouse has heard from our customers. So we've asked this question of a lot of our customers, and I'll make a brief statement about Enghouse. So we've been in the business of contact center for well over 25 years now, and many of you may know us from our on-premise products that we've been taking to market in the region for a long time. But maybe what is a little less known about Enghouse is that we've been in the cloud contact center business for over 20 years. So we, throughout the globe, have been offering cloud contact center solutions, but we've been doing it in a way that has typically not been Enghouse branded. So we're not as well known, but we've offered our cloud solutions through a number of service providers and telcos around the world, like some big ones like British Telecom and Telefonica and Spain and French Telecom and France and TELUS, the biggest telco in Canada. So we have driven cloud contact center for over 20 years through those service providers. And as the market has been shifting to this focus on cloud contact center, we've been shifting as well to offer alternatives, either Enghouse branded alternatives or partner branded alternatives, but we continue also our service provider business as well. So we're now offering a number of different cloud alternatives, but we've been doing this for a long time. So we have a lot of stories and a lot of experience with folks that have shifted their operations to the cloud for a couple of decades now. And so we've heard it all. We've heard the move to the cloud is completely driven at the C-level of an organization. We've heard that it really is driven by the fact that the existing on-premise equipment is old and out of date and no longer provides any tax benefits. We've heard that it's really just too tough to move the on-premise apps to the next level up, and that it costs a lot of money and they got to pay for services to do that. We've heard that they're not convinced that they should be relying on the specific guy in the back office who's the only one that knows how to manage this on-premise application. So just having those skills resident in one or two people puts the business at risk. We've heard the argument that, well, we're secure, we believe in our IT guys, but honestly, we're starting to think that some of the cloud guys may actually be more secure than we are. It's certainly a focus of the cloud infrastructure providers. They're very focused on security and on the standards for security and various methods for protecting data. So they're spending a lot of money on it, so maybe they're better. And these cloud apps, they're newer, so they're more modern. They've developed new user interfaces, new analytics views, new ways of doing self-service. new ways of managing customer interactions, maybe are a bit cutting edge. And so maybe the modernization is coming along with cloud. And then this is a big one. A lot of businesses say, you know what, we don't know in advance, but we may have to scale up and scale down quickly. Seasonality is a big factor with some businesses. For example, we have some folks in the performing arts businesses where they have a season where they sell their subscription to the season, and they really scale up during that seasonality. So the ability to scale up, scale down in number of seats and in the usage of contact center can happen as well, and cloud might be a little easier to do that. And then of course, the argument that cloud is cheaper over time. So we've heard all of these arguments. They're all valid, and they all push businesses to actively consider whether cloud is the best thing for them, and to really watch out for the things that are maybe have been holding them back over the years. So to follow up on the earlier question about where you're at with your planning, for the folks who said you're actively considering a move to cloud or have already been moving to cloud, what is your primary reason for moving? So if we could ask you to kind of answer again, this is our last poll question, I promise. Quickly give us an answer, and that'll help us a little bit with our positioning here. Okay, the numbers are totaling. So good, they're still adjusting a bit, getting a little more balanced. Okay, so it looks like we're locked in at about 45% are saying scalability and flexibility, almost up to 50% now, and about 28%, almost 30% are saying reduced IT overhead and reliance on IT. Then a smaller percentage are saying the pace of innovation. A small percentage is saying security, which is interesting, 3%. So we will talk about security. I'm surprised that number isn't a bit higher, just because the cloud guys have been so, including us, have been so focused on touting the security of the cloud. So Justin, any surprises for you based on those stats?
No, just looking at that now. No, look, talking to our clients as well, I think the scalability, flexibility, and that that dependence on someone in IT to be able to do everything. We can't do anything without anyone moving, or single point of failure in our business because there's only one guy who knows things. They're always the two leaders for us. And look, cost is probably a little bit higher, I would have thought, but yeah, that's probably the only thing that I would say stands out a little bit. Other than that, very consistent.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I promised that we would do a little bit of a balanced look here. So here's what we're hearing from our customers. Some of you probably on the call today that have concerns about moving to the cloud. So I'll just put them all up there at once. Now there's some interesting concerns here. Some of them I think can be countered with arguments about the cloud. Some of them, may be specific to a business that just has a specific requirement that makes cloud a little more difficult or challenging. But I'll take a couple of these as examples. We can't let our data outside of the building. So I actually was at an American automotive manufacturing company a few years back. And when I went in to see them, I checked my cell phone and my laptop at the door. No electronic devices were allowed inside. I passed through a severe security gate that actually had detectors on it for electronic equipment. I went inside of the building and went up to folks' desk and conference rooms, and there was no access to the internet from any of the desktops. They literally could not use a cloud application. It was impossible based on the IT standards of the business. Now, their rationale for that was, look, we design cars here. Our designs are what make us special and make us very, very proprietary. And we literally can't risk a picture of NER designs getting out. And so the way they did it was by completely locking it down. So now that's an extreme case. Admittedly, that's an extreme case. But the consideration of how willing you are to put your data in a quote public place is an interesting consideration. So even though the cloud vendors are touting security, that consideration, how willing you are to consider moving data, is a factor. The other parts of this that I wanted to focus on is, does it make sense to have some level of control? So the middle one there, we want to control our own upgrade path, is also something we hear often from folks that have some concerns about the cloud. So with cloud applications, typically you're in a multi-tenanted environment where everyone gets upgraded at once. Now, does that upgrade involve a major shift in functionality of the application? No, not very often. Usually it's an incremental shift, but things are changing, perhaps on a monthly basis, perhaps every few months, something major might change. And that could affect the users and the people who manage moves, adds, and changes with the application. So there's some relearning required, and sometimes it can be relearning multiple times a year, not only about new features that are coming, but about how maybe a user interface or an experience might change for your agents. So now you have to be cognizant of that and willing to adapt and change as things move. And that's okay. It's okay to have that kind of capability, to have that focus in your environment, but it is one of those things that you might want to be concerned with. We're going to talk about back office integrations as we go along here, so I just won't spend any time on that. But that is a factor where there's a perception that it's a bit more difficult to integrate cloud applications together than it is to integrate on-premise applications together. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then, interestingly, we hear the argument, it's cheaper over time. That same argument was on the cloud slide. So there's a perception on both sides of the equation that it's cheaper. And which one is true? So we thought we'd take a look at that. So we did a very, very cursory cost comparison. Here's a scenario. Imagine we're a 100 agent contact center, and if you would have bought that 100 agent contact center as perpetual agents, it would have cost you, let's say, $1,000 per agent. That's of not atypical cost of a multi-channel agent who can handle many, many types of interactions at once, coupled with some other functionality like analytics and IVR and some other things that you would buy along with that agent. So that's not an atypical price, what you might pay today for a perpetual agent. And then typically you would pay the vendor a maintenance fee of, it might be a little less than that, might be a little more than that, depending on the kind of maintenance you've signed up for. But let's just say, for sake of argument, 20%. But in the cloud world, you'd pay maybe $100 an agent a month. So, and then, in the on-premise world, you've got to put some servers in place, you've got to put some space and a rack in place, you've got to put some disk storage in place. Whereas in the cloud, you don't have to put any of that in your data center, but you might pay some additional fees like monthly storage and so on. One myth is that cloud upgrades are absolutely free. They're not all the time. Sometimes with that incremental upgrade, you get stuff as it goes along, but occasionally you get a change that affects your integration with other applications and some other things that require some services. So I assumed in this argument that, let's say, a cloud upgrade as a whole is about 50% of the cost of Perpetual, and also assume that it took, say, 2 staff to manage this contact center in a Perpetual environment, but only 1 if you were managing it in cloud. Another myth is that cloud staff is 0. You still want to manage the moves, adds, and changes in your application. You want to be able to add queues. You want to be able to change your IVR scripts. You want to be able to change your agent workflow some of the time. You want to be able to change your routing rules. You want to be able to do things that would adjust how your contact center operates. So for the sake of argument, we assume that was a 2-to-1 ratio, and here's how it comes out. It's pretty close. So if we look at cloud versus perpetual in this model, we're looking at a crossover point of about 5 years. At that point, cloud is a bit more expensive than perpetual. Now again, this is a bit of an ideal model, a bit of an ideal case. Everybody's circumstances are different depending on how old the equipment is, depending on whether they have to upgrade servers on a regular basis if they have them perpetually, depending on a number of other factors. What's your cost for space? What's your cost for SAN storage, and so on. So it can vary significantly. But in this case, we do see a crossover point. But I wanted to point out that this can change radically depending on scale. So let's say you're a 30 agent contact center. Maybe that's a little bit more typical. In Australia and New Zealand, a lot of the contact centers are a little bit smaller size. Same model, but now for the 30 agent, we only need 2 servers instead of 3, let's say. We still have the 2-to-1 ratio of staffing, but how does this come out? In this case, cloud is significantly cheaper than perpetual, and it widens over time. Why would that be? If I'm paying a monthly subscription for a cloud agent, why would the difference in cost actually widen? Well, because I'm seeing this factor of staffing making a huge difference. Because in a smaller contact center, software is a smaller component of the overall cost. And many other components, the differences with many other components creep in, like the cost of the management staff, like the cost of the space and servers and so on. So in this particular case, and again, it's an ideal case, admittedly, but in this case, we're seeing a wider difference between the cost of cloud and the cost of perpetual. Justin, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, as you know, we had a bit of a run through on this yesterday, so it was a good topic of conversation around trying to get our head around costs. And I think absolutely agree. I think there's the cost benefits are a bit stronger in the smaller centres. But as we discussed as a group yesterday, we've done 10 cloud migrations over the last year, and every one of those was different and widely varying costs. So there are a lot of variables that go into making it right. So yeah, it's a good indicator, and I think as a rule, the smaller centres there's some cost benefits, but I can't stress enough that every single contact center is different, and there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. Some of those John mentioned, and you've got other things around, do you have one dedicated staff member already in a 30-seat contact center, or is it maybe only 20% of someone's role? Do you have multiple sites, or is it a single site? There's a whole bunch of variables, but yeah, I think as a rule, I think we all agree that the smaller centers seem to have a bigger cost benefit.
Right. And so about a third of you in the last poll said that reduced IT overhead and reliance was a key factor, was the major factor in your consideration about cloud. This actually bears that out, I think, because this shows that by reducing your IT overhead and resilience, you actually are saving significant money in the equation over time, and it gets more and more as the years wear on. So, and this is a 10-year study, and again, things change in 10 years, so it's ideal. This is a straight line in both cloud and perpetual, but it's very seldom going to be a straight line because you're going to have little peaks and valleys along the way. But I think it's important to kind of do this level of analysis and consideration for your own business. Consider those factors.
John, the only other thing I'd add into that is just the discussion around the OPEX and CAPEX side of things, because it is an important consideration for some businesses, so particularly for the accountants, but whether you actually have to go and buy servers and spend money up front, or can you do it as an OPEX model where it's just out of your operating budget and it's per month for X dollars. So for some businesses that is also an important consideration.
Right. Great point, Justin. Thanks. Okay, we did want to kind of talk about one key aspect of this whole thing, and that is integration. I think with contact centers, there's a lot of value that comes out of when you plug a contact center application into other applications and data sources within your business. Let's take a quick look. For instance, if you have a good IVR, or even in the modern world, some good AI and bot capability, you can amp up your level of self-service. Now, on the surface, the benefit of that is cost savings, of course, but it's also about customer convenience. Customers have grown to want to serve themselves for many of the kinds of questions they have. They don't want to wait on hold for a live agent. They want to be able to solve their own problem, whether it's over the web or through an IVR or through some kind of chatbot or whatever that mechanism might be. Also, it provides them access off hours in the middle of the night when you don't have any agents on staff. The customer can still get answers. So that gives them a lot of benefit. And the only way to pull that off generally is by integrating the contact center to another application and data source. Similarly, you can screen pop the CRM record for your agent and shave valuable time off every call, every interaction. And it gives that agent the context of who the customer is, their history, and what they're calling and interacting about. You can do skills-based routing to the right person if you base it on data about the customer and what they're requesting. And the benefit there is then agents don't have to send the call to somebody else because this other person is the better agent to handle you. And you get that better service, that increased level of service. And then if you actually start to track these interactions and tie it back to the customer record, either by populating activities in the CRM system or by populating CRM data within the contact center database, you can do it either way or both, then you're getting a full understanding of the real cost of a customer. How many interactions does it take to solve a given problem? Can I do it on the first contact? What percentage of the time can I do that? And I can start to correlate contact center costs and data with various segments of customers. Do I truly handle my premier customers better than I do my non-premier customers, which is a goal of my business, but maybe I'm not pulling it off. So you start to be able to measure those sorts of things. You can only do these things if you integrate your contact center with data in the back office or in another cloud application. And those are the options, right? You can pull this integration off in a multi-cloud environment by building a cloud-to-cloud web service, getting a little technical, but it's got to be encrypted because you don't want clear text data over the wire heading between one cloud and another, and it's got to be able to be served up by these cloud applications through a standard API, typically a REST API that offers web services. So you want whatever solutions you have to integrate together through a tried and true, very secure mechanism, or you can use a hybrid where you're tying your server through a firewall to a cloud application. Again, you have to drill a hole in the firewall to do that, but you do it in a careful way so that only this path of data is allowed. It's very possible to pull this off. And again, the advice, I guess, that we have, and we try to guide our customers along this path, is if you're going to move to the cloud, then let's make sure that you don't lose the value of the integration. The temptation is, nah, I'm just going to turn on my browser and access the cloud and I'm done. That's not necessarily the highest value solution for you. So don't lose sight of what that extra data and that extra integration gives you. Wanted to put up maybe a few items that you may or may not have thought of that kind of fall on either side of this equation. On the cloud side, there's a big compelling thing that's really prevalent right now. It's a trend and it's becoming more and more popular in the market, and that is the ability to apply artificial intelligence to both the conversation through, say, a bot, an intelligent bot, which could work through voice or chat or email or whatever your choice of media is. And can you apply artificial intelligence to the way you process your data to give you some insights or analytics? In order to pull that off, you need the cloud, because the cloud can quickly bring to bear a scalable CPU and GPU architecture that gives you a tremendous amount of processing power to process data needed for things like speech analysis to understand what the customer is really asking about. And you can also use speech analysis to analyze the interactions of the customer in order to get their sentiment or kind of how they're feeling about the level of service you're providing. And then another big argument for the cloud is decentralization. As the world is moving to more and more digital channels, more and more off voice communication and off hours, the cloud can make it easier for you to amp up your work at home agents to handle your peaks and valleys and even to be able to come online quickly to handle off hours. If you have a lot of variability in your staffing, it's possible to more easily bring people in by using a cloud model. And that ties to this peaks and valleys kind of argument. And then the other subtle argument for cloud that doesn't get brought up very often, but is very true, is that since the cloud is incrementing functionality rapidly, more rapidly than on-premise applications that require an upgrade, then cloud applications may adjust to market trends more quickly and technical trends and standards changes more quickly. So you may be able to add new capabilities using a cloud application easier than you could by planning upgrades for your on-premise application. But on the other side of the argument, the on-premise applications are still more mature. It's just a fact, regardless if the cloud vendors, including us, are saying that their cloud features are as mature as the on-premise contact centers, the fact of the matter is they're not. It will take a while for the cloud applications to catch up. So what does that mean? So even though the features may be more modern or may leverage capabilities that on-premise doesn't have, like the advanced CPU processing power, these features have been tested over a long, long time and enhanced and have been tried and true to meet the best practices of contact centers. So they're mature. And that's just one of the advantages that on-premise is going to have for a while until cloud gets to the point where the feature set has parity. And then you may have a model where your folks are just so experienced and so seasoned and so used to the environment that they have. That could be IT people. It could be your contact center management people that handle the changes within your environment. It could be the agents. It could be the supervisors. Maybe you want to continue to leverage that experience. So is there a way to do that, but still move to the cloud? And there is, because all of these arguments for premise also apply to taking the existing application and putting it into a private cloud. And this is another option that as Enghouse we provide, the ability to keep your application intact, keep your data intact, your configuration, your training, and everything else, but basically take the burden off you for managing the application. Let Enghouse manage the service for you, and we'll do it in a way that's off-premise, and we'll do it in a way that guarantees the security and uptime. So that is a way to leverage kind of the best of both worlds, and you can do that, and that's an option as well. So there's options here, and if you fall on one side or the other of this equation, you can leverage some of those options. So what are the decision factors? I kind of put everything we've talked to onto one checkmark slide here and tried to give a little bit of a balance to the advantages on both sides. You can see there's a lot of check marks in the public cloud column, but there are some check marks in the other columns that need to be considered. And since we'll give you this, I'll leave it up for a second, but we'll give you the presentation so you can take a look at this, and we can help you and guide you with a lot of these factors as they apply to your business. You know, if you are definitely going cloud, but you have concerns over upgrade timing, we have a way to help you with that. If you're definitely going cloud and you're concerned with retaining the capabilities of certain features, we can help you with that as well. So there's a lot of guidance, I think, that as someone who's been doing this for a long, long time, we can help you with, and we would love to help you with. So I'll just lay out on this kind of final final slide here before we go to your questions, and then I'll let Justin pitch in here as well. What are some of the key considerations we've talked about? And these are the key things if you are planning a move to cloud, make sure you pay attention to. One of them is watch for extra fees. So make sure that when you're going, that if you have a service level guarantee requirement rather than a service level objective, and they are different. A service level objective would be something that where the cloud vendor would say, we have an objective to be up 99.9% of the time. But if you want us to guarantee that, we'll charge you X. And that is common in what the cloud vendors provide because it does require extra resources to guarantee a service level. So watch for those kinds of extra fees. And the same with the staffing variability. If one of the benefits you're trying to get is that you want to scale up and scale down quickly in your usage, but only pay for what you're using, sometimes there's an extra fee associated with that. Watch for the fact that even if it's cloud-based, you still can be a bit complex in your implementation. Look, you've still got to implement your self-service and IVR scripts. You've still got to build your queuing model. You've still got to build your model for when queues are up and down and open and closed, and whether that's automated or not. You've still got to build your agent desktop environment in a good contact center, and we count ourselves in this category. You can actually take your agent desktop and make it look the way you want it to look and handle the integrations with your back office or other cloud-based applications and make sure those are seamlessly built so they integrate into your environment. The point is, even if you're going cloud, it's not just a matter of turning on the browser, connecting, and you're done. There's some complexity to it, and you need a guide to make sure that that's done in the right way. You will still want to control moves, adds, and changes. You're not going to want to send an email to a foreign agent every time you want to add a new person to your contact center, or every time you want to add a new queue. You're going to want to do that yourself. So you're going to want to get training on the cloud application, and you're going to want to be able to take on that part of the management process. So again, it's not free. It's something you have to be trained on and take ownership of. And then take a look, as we start to get into, whether the cloud applications have the level of sophistication of the on-premise. These are some of the areas to pay attention to: the management of the application, the administrative options that you have for controlling things in your environment, like queue availability and open and closed hours and agent configurations and service levels and such. Make sure you take a look at the management capabilities and also take a look at the level of analytics capabilities. What are you relying on today? What views, what insights are you relying on? Make sure you've got those as you move forward. Same with the integration capabilities and architecture, which we've talked about. Make sure those are secure. Probe into security specifically. What's the approach to security of the cloud or private cloud option that you're considering? And what's the track record for security that the vendor is offering you? Probe into quality of service. Are calls interrupted? Are calls ever garbled? Make sure, because a lot of the time you see people move, again, telephony and contact center together into the cloud, and that way you're really concerned about, okay, it's not just the quality of calls into the contact center, it's the quality of calls in general that you have to take into consideration. And then look into what it means to migrate from where you are today to where you're going. Can you map what you like about your existing configuration to the new environment that you're moving to? What about your historical data? Do you need to keep it around? Do you need to archive it? Do you need to continue to access it? If so, how will you do that as you move forward? At least for a while. Some businesses, for example, have a rule to keep recorded calls around for many years because you have to be able to access those calls for compliance purposes. Just an example, but if that's a requirement of your business, then how do you accommodate that as you migrate to a new environment? So threw up just a few considerations here to take a look at as you consider your movement. Justin, anything to add?
John, that's a great overview. I hope that's given people some insight into the complexity sometimes of making these decisions. I think for everyone, it's just being clear about what the outcomes you want for your business. I mean, at the end of the day, the call center is an enabler to enable your business to do what they want for your customers. So being clear about the outcomes you want. We're spoiled for choice with technology solutions in call centers today. It's never been better, and a feature-rich set of stuff that we can get. All those sort of new shiny new toys that you spoke about are all within reach and quite affordable. It's just about being clear on what you want and talking to the right vendor, and they'll certainly come up with a solution for you. I don't want to take up too much time because we've got to allow some time for questions, I think. So I'll shut up.
Thanks, Justin. And we of course want to be that right vendor for you. So hopefully you'll consider us as you consider this move. So I guess I'll close things off with a quick story. So we one of our cloud customers today is the state of Louisiana. They're based in the Americas. Louisiana, for those of you down under, is the state where New Orleans is. And the state of Louisiana uses us in a very interesting way. They've combined the hybrid approach with the multi-tenanted cloud approach. Now, how would they do that? Well, what they've done is they've built a state of Louisiana multi-tenanted contact center environment within our overall multi-tenanted environment, segmented off so that they would have control over the ability to add and subtract new people and new departments into the overall contact center operation for the state. It's very interesting. So the state has added on a number of segmented contact centers that take advantage of some of the integrations they've built into their back office applications, but that are separate departments using contact centers for separate purposes. Example would be, the most recent one would be the Department of Unemployment Services for the state. So folks that are unemployed want to be able to call or contact the customer service organization within the state to ask what their options are in terms of getting unemployment benefits and such. So they have that. And one of the nice things about this, and again, this plays beautifully into the cloud story, is the state has a great ability to scale up and scale down quickly and to add new departments quickly as needed. And what happens in that part of the United States is they get hurricanes that come in off the Gulf of Mexico. And that hurricane season can be very dramatic for all the states that are around that region. And they had such a good system in the state that when the other states within the US were hit by hurricanes, they called up the state of Louisiana and said, can we use your contact center facilities to quickly add our own departments in to handle hurricane emergency services calls? And they did. They pulled it off within 2 days. They had contact centers up and running. Now, admittedly, they did this because they already had built a very comprehensive, very high quality contact center environment, secure, good uptime and such. So they were able to quickly apply that to the other states. But it really was a beautiful story. And it's kind of a good public service story, but it's also a good story about flexibility and growth in a cloud environment. So I just wanted to close off with that. And then we will turn it over to you guys. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. Here we go with questions. Now, there's a few come through while we've been online. Question for Justin. It says here, we know you're based in Australia, but could you say if what you're seeing in Australia around cloud migration is about the same in New Zealand as well?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, Kath. I spent about 3 years based out of Wellington, so I'm pretty familiar with the New Zealand market. And yeah, I think there's a lot of familiarities between the contact center industry in Australia and New Zealand, full stop, and that includes cloud.
Mm-hmm. Another one for Justin. Do any of the organisations that you've seen move to cloud ever need to change back?
Well, put it this way, no, not so far anyway. I very much doubt it. I think there's a lot of effort that goes into getting things set up, and everyone's been happy, so no.
Excellent. Okay, one for John. So John, because you are our global VP, why is cloud adoption different in each region? We're seeing different take-ups.
And that is really true. We're seeing some areas of Europe that are a bit slower in moving to the cloud than other areas, like say the US or Australia, New Zealand, which are faster. Why are some of the areas of Europe a little slower? They might have some government regulations, like in Germany, for example, they've got some data protection regulations that basically dictate that data has to be stored in country. And then they have some other things that are kind of slowing things down over there. In some areas of Europe, some of the old traditional PBX resellers have decided to basically offer their PBX services and contact center services in a private cloud. So in that sense, public cloud is a little bit slower because the kind of market leaders in region have taken on the offering of private cloud, still cloud, but it is this private cloud option. So it does differ fairly dramatically depending on how the region handles the situation.
Okay. Here's a good one, John. Does cloud gradually increase the OPEX?
It does. Well, increase by increase, I assume you mean the difference in OPEX between cloud and premise. So it kind of depends on what you're paying for on premise today. You may be paying OPEX on premise for your equipment. You may be paying OPEX on premise for space, especially in a data center. You may be paying OPEX today in a number of different ways. So moving to cloud can actually reduce that OPEX spend. If you're talking about moving from CapEx to OpEx, then again, you have to model it. Just as we try to do in the simplistic case, there's a lot more factors in the real world. You have to model whether the move is more or less expensive. But I will say that in a medium-sized contact center environment, some of the costs, the other costs outside of software, dwarf the software costs. So the costs of staff and the costs of equipment are much more inexpensive when you move to cloud.
Right. Okay, here's a topical one. How can we be guaranteed that our data security, of our data security, especially with PCI and GDPR?
All right. So a lot of the cloud vendors, us included, are focused heavily on standards. PCI DSS is one of those standards. So although nobody can guarantee your business will be PCI compliant, as an example, you're the only one who can guarantee that based on how your business processes operate. What we're in the business of doing is providing you the tools and capabilities to allow you to be compliant. So we have the methods to allow you to, say, turn off calls when, say, financial information is being provided, like a credit card, or turn off recordings, or blank out areas of the screen so that the agent can't see that information, things like that. Those are the capabilities we can bring to bear, which means that you can implement PCI compliance, for example. GDPR, same way. We have tools built into our application to allow us to anonymize or remove personal data. You have to use them, but we would provide you the tools.
Okay. Now we are right on the hour, and there's a couple of other really good questions, but what we will do is we will respond to those specifically to you. And there's also been a question regarding a specific Enghouse product, and we wanted to keep this a generic discussion today, so we will take that one offline as well. I'd like to very much thank John and Justin for your excellent insights today about Cloud Contact Center. We will be sending out the recording, and we will be addressing the questions that have come through, because there's a couple on data breaches and privacy, so we'll address those, and we will send those answers with the slide deck and the recording to all the participants so that you have that. Thank you everyone for having made the time to attend. I hope you found it valuable. As always, we'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback on the presentation, any more questions, or any ideas for future webinars. We want to do a lot more of these. So we look forward to going into more depth with anyone interested in any of our solutions, cloud or otherwise. And we will be in touch after this webinar with a link to the recording, the slide deck, and the questions. So thank you everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.